You're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's 50th anniversary rewatch of Star Trek, in which we look at all 729 episodes from beginning to end. I'm Mike from Stage 9, and today I'm joined by Caitlin. How's it going, Caitlin?
Oh, it's going pretty good. I'm enjoying the fall weather.
Yeah, it's nice, right? I like not having to turn on the air conditioning anymore. It's very pleasant.
Exactly, that period after the AC, but before the heating comes in.
Exactly. So, thank you for joining us here. So you're new to the network, but you've done some Star Trek podcasting in the past, right?
Yes, but I only have a few months under my belt. I am very active on social media, and I'm a huge Trekkie and a Whovian as well. And I became friends with someone who was in the world of Doctor Who podcasting, who wanted to start a Star Trek podcast, and he didn't know a lot of people who had both fandoms in their obsessions. So I guested on one podcast and it worked out, and now I have my own microphone and I have Audacity. I'm rearing to go.
Nice. So what's the name of the podcast, just so people know?
It's Star Trek Romulans Bearing Gifts, and if you are familiar with Doctor Who Mostly Harmless Cutaway or Prognosis Negative or Sci-Fi Party Line, it's in the vein of those.
Excellent. So today we're going to be talking about 2 episodes of Voyager, Scientific Method and Year of Hell Part 1. Now, am I right in thinking that Voyager is your jam? You're a Voyager fan? Is that
Oh,
correct?
yes. I am
Okay.
totally digging to the journey. I'm going through their back catalog, jumping around. Voyager is the reason why I'm a Trekkie, even though I was raised on TNG.
So let's get started with the first episode, Scientific Method. This is the episode where the crew is experiencing some strange maladies, and the doctor figures out that there are secret, hidden alien beings who are doing scientific experiments on the crew in order to, figure out how to cure diseases and whatnot for their alien race. And hijinks ensue. So, what did you think about Scientific Method?
It was really an interesting episode. Janeway is a scientist, and to have her faced with this conundrum that she must protect her crew, but the aliens are justifying it for the sake of science, could almost, air quotes on almost, see both sides of the argument. But at the end of the day, the crew's lives are at risk, and a red shirt dies on the bridge. So it was an interesting episode. I really enjoyed seeing the characters acting a little frazzled, a little out of their protocol. Tom and B'Elanna, for instance, acting like teenagers, and Janeway getting so pissed she chews them out. And then the chicken scene, playing chicken with the aliens and flying into a pulsar. That's a really good climax. I think we got lucky with this block.
Yeah, I agree. I like this episode a lot too. We've talked about this numerous times, but Voyager, I guess they've talked about how they set out to do crazy, weird, high concept science fiction shows, and I think that's where the series really excels, and this is an example of that. It's such a bizarre idea, and then to when you have the reveal and you start seeing these people on Voyager through Seven's perspective and everything, it's freaky. It's super freaky. It sort of like taps into your greatest fears, or my greatest fears in a sense, and it's terrifying. And I think it's really, really good. It's interesting. It does bring up the cool moral dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like you're saying, the stuff with B'Elanna and Tom is really fun, especially since you're just sort of like seeing the beginning of their relationship here. and they kind of like really rushed into it with that other episode, and giving it a chance to breathe here, I think is great, and I really like that relationship a lot. And then also, you're right, it does have the cool climax at the end. And I mean, Janeway just sort of like going full Janeway and just being like, I'm not going to put up with this. I don't care anymore. I think that's pretty great. So yeah, this is a really solid episode for sure. All right, well, should we move on to our next episode for today? Year of Hell Part 1. Now this is the big one. The dad from that 70s show is doing things to alter the timeline in order to preserve the way that he thinks history should go. And Voyager kind of gets caught in the crossfire, and the result is going through a region of space which is very, very hostile, and essentially for this year, Voyager takes a massive beating and suffers massive losses, and hijinks ensue. So this is just part 1, but this is an episode which is considered by many. Now, we talked about Scorpion a few days back and how that's considered to be probably the best episode of Voyager by fans, but Year of Hell is right behind it.
Yes, definitely.
And so I guess my question to you is, do you think that Year of Hell is one of the best episodes of Voyager?
I think so. Definitely part 1 holds up. There is a chance to finally see what the Delta Quadrant should have been dealing Voyager from day 1. The ship is battered beyond belief, and the resources are on the fritz. It's not like the Enterprise D with its mall-like atmosphere just cruising through space. One of the reasons why I love Voyager is the crew dynamic and how much it feels like a family. And that theme is brought up because Janeway is stubborn. She refuses to split up the family, even though Chakotay has brought it up at least a couple of times that we see. And then the episode ends with that climax of Janeway realizing there's nothing she can do for her crew, and the best solution is to split up the family. It must have been really hard for her to make that choice, but it makes for a really good climax in having to wait till next week without the aid of the internet, discussing what will happen. It must have been hard to watch that first time viewing, but we are lucky we have Netflix and other streaming devices.
Yes, we are. I know that this is right around the time that they started doing these like epic 2-parters, and I'm honestly not as familiar with Voyager as I should be, but this one was just it was part 1 aired, and then the next week part 2 aired. It wasn't like a one night.
Correct. I think the ones, especially with part 1 and part 2 in the titles, are ones that were meant to be week 1, week 2. It's later on in this show when you get to like Flesh and Blood, it gets a little trickier. But yes, this one is definitely week 1 and week 2.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this has always sort of been my favorite episode of Voyager, and yet at the same time, I have kind of a love-hate relationship, but that comes in, I think, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes.
But as far as, this episode is concerned, it's really kind of what everyone wanted from the show. It's kind of what we were promised of the show from the beginning, and you hear stories now, with like Brandon Braga talking about how they wanted to do this arc over the span of like an entire season, and it's like, oh, why didn't you guys do that? And I know that it had nothing to do with them. It had everything to do with the studio or the network or whatever. But, I mean, that's, I think, really what we all want to see. And, I think that this episode is kind of, Ron Moore talks about how the few weeks he spent on Voyager were rather frustrating because they weren't doing the stories that he wanted to tell. And it sounds like the stories that he wanted to tell were essentially this. And he ended up doing it on Battlestar Galactica, which is pretty cool. But this is kind of a cool sort of like alternate reality of Voyager, not just like of the characters that we see, but sort of an alternate reality of how the series could have gone.
Yes.
And because of that, I find it to be really fascinating and really well done. I mean, it's cool to see, the toll that it takes on this crew, and actually watching it and seeing how much happens. I wonder if it would have worked as well as everyone kind of hoped that it would, because it really does take a massive toll. Like, it's emotionally draining, and to do this over the span of a year or a series would basically turn Voyager into a different series. And
definitely. And right now, like, Voyager is kind of a stepchild of the franchise because it is episodic like TNG, but they have the arc of them trying to get home, and sometimes the format is more Deep Space Nine arc based, and sometimes it's episodic. And if we had gone with the Year of Hell being an actual season, it would have been much more like what Deep Space Nine did in the later years, and you can't just randomly show up to episode 15 of season whatever and watch, comfort food.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I mean, well, I definitely personally prefer Deep Space Nine and that method of storytelling and everything. Like, especially in this rewatch here, I've come to appreciate sort of the random standalone episodes that Voyager does, and it is sort of like the original series in that it's kind of like anthology based in a sense. And episodes like Scientific Method I think are really, really good. There's also a lot of these standalone episodes which don't work for me at all, but this format does allow them to do something different than what Deep Space Nine was doing. And in a sense, I kind of like the fact that they were both on, watching the two series simultaneously now, you really see like a stark contrast in the type of stories that they're telling. And I think that that's interesting. It's interesting that, there were two different philosophies at play while these shows were going on.
Yes.
And I think both of them have their merits for sure.
Yes, like, I'm not as familiar with Deep Space Nine as Voyager, but I can definitely appreciate its quality.
Yeah. So Year of Hell Part 1, it is interesting though. I think maybe because like the last time that I watched Voyager was basically when the DVDs came out. I just like barreled through the entire series, and this was the one that stood out to me because I think it was so different from everything else that we had seen. But watching it now, I don't think that it is my favorite episode, because I do like a lot of like the weird crazy things that they do, and these sort of like tiny episodes are really standing out to me as something unique, whereas this is just, I think I liked the idea of this more than the episode itself. But like, I mean, we talked about Macrocosm a few weeks ago, and I mean, that episode is something which you would never think about. I completely forgot that it existed. And yet when I was watching it, I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life, or even Scientific Method, so I don't know. It's weird. I'm anxious to get to the end of Voyager and then see where Year of Hell sort of like fits into my overall standings or whatever you want to call them. All right. Well, anything else on Year of Hell Part 1?
I just love that Chakotay replicates Janeway a birthday gift and refuses to recycle it because, quote, he replicated it way before the Year of Hell even started.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. All right. Well, I guess that pretty much wraps up today's episode. Caitlin, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, I like to say my second home is Twitter. I'm on Twitter as Walsh Caitlin. That's my last name, first name, reversed.
Excellent. And you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. And you can also find me here on the network doing Stage 9, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek. And we will be back tomorrow to talk about 2 more episodes of Star Trek, Year of Hell Part 2, and You Are Cordially Invited.